we have here during this session, we have several members who have taken the pledge of the Safe Space Commitment and made obviously a commitment to share, and they're here to share what they have learned and been working on and what role in the Safe Space Commitment, what role the Safe Space Commitment has really played in their work. And how their organizations and collaboratives are kind of moving ahead. So we're going to spend kind of the first hour now just letting them talk. So we're going to have a couple of each presenter is going to talk about 10 minutes, introducing themselves and the work that their organization or collaboratives and themselves have been working towards. And then we have some moderated Q&A, and then we'll then jump into the next half hour for a larger Q&A, where we would encourage everyone in this room and those on Zoom to raise your hand if you have questions, but also raise your hand if you have answers. So if you have an answer to a question or want to share your own experience, we'd encourage you to also share that with the group here. So with that, I am going to pass it on to Neha and Lindsay, which I'll find Lindsay online and spotlight her for us.
Thanks so much. And can you call up our slides? We just have 3. Great. Well, I'm happy to kick this off. I'm Lindsay Campbell. I'm with the U.S. Forest Service, and I'm sharing my time with Neha, who is in the room with you from New York City Park. So we'll see how this goes. I'll start us off and then I'll pass it to Neha. But what you're seeing here on a cover slide is a space between 2 logos. So the New York City Urban Field Station is really a boundary spanning federal, city, and nonprofit research and management collaboration. So the U.S. Forest Service is a federal agency where I work. And particularly I'm coming from the research branch. And then New York City Parks is, the largest municipal land manager in the city. We have a third partner, which is the Natural Areas Conservancy, representing the nonprofit side. But since Neha and I are just coming from these 2 agencies, we're only speaking to that right now. And when we talk about a boundary space or this space between the logos, there really was an intent when we founded this field station to carve out space between our bureaucracies to foster innovation and co-learning, certainly research, but also reflection. That's really baked into our mission. And I think you'll see that that's part of how we pursue and integrate DEIJ into our approach. That's the lens we take. So on the next slide, there's just a little bit of background about the field station. Where our mission, our formal mission that we sort of co-created, is to improve the quality of life in urban areas by conducting and supporting research about social ecological systems and natural resources management. We have a physical space out in Bayside, Queens, but we're also increasingly in this day and age really virtual and a network of collaborators. We were started in 2006 with an MOU, a memorandum of understanding between the Forest Service and the Parks Department. And we're really modeled on the Forest Service tradition of having long-term experimental forests. So we try and do long-term social ecological research. And Neha will take us through the programs and the ways internally that we've tried to meet our safe space commitments. But before we get into that, we also wanted to introduce ourselves personally because, like the introducers said, this work is both personal and organizational and institutional. So like I said, I'm a federal employee. I'm a social scientist. I'm a PhD researcher. I've actually worked for the Forest Service for 20 years. So I'm solidly mid-career, maybe even senior career at this point. I am a white woman of European ancestry. I'm a mother, which really feels more important to me these days. I grew up, middle class. I'm highly educated, so I think of myself as having a fair amount of privilege, and I try and use that privilege to make space for others and widen conversations within the sort of conservation and natural resource management context that tend to be fairly patriarchal and white dominated. So I will come back in the Q&A, but I'm going to pass it to Neha, who's in the room, to introduce herself and some of our programs.
All right, can you hear me? All right.
Yes.
Thanks, Lindsay. So hi, everybody. My name's Neha, for anyone I didn't get to say hi to during the icebreaker. And I am a wildlife and fisheries ecologist with the New York City Parks Department. I work in the natural resources arm of things, and our division is called Environment and Planning. And I'm a wildlife ecologist and do a lot of work in the field with monitoring and assessment. But I've also started to get more involved in the New York City Urban Field Station. My supervisor, Novum, is sitting over there, and she was part of, I think, building out the Urban Field Station. I've only been here for about 2 years, but I've been part of the wildlife conservation field for about 10 years, working in university settings, several different nonprofits, and now in a government setting. And so yeah, it's been really interesting to learn about and be a part of the New York City Urban Field Station and its programs, and see how DEIJ is applied in these multiple different settings and sectors, and specifically like the advantage of being a boundary space or being a kind of in-between space for organizations, especially governments that have very large bureaucracies. And so I'm South Asian. I'm a second generation immigrant. My parents immigrated here from India. And I also grew up with a lot of privilege, but I also had to make sense of a lot of this field and my experiences and learn a lot about white supremacy and colonialism and how it is embedded in some of how wildlife conservation is done, including and how we speak about it. And so yeah, so that I think gives a little context to my own background in this, but also how exciting it's been to be a part of the Urban Field Station that tries to apply a lot of this, the principles of DEIJ. One more piece of background is that I've done DEIJ in some other organizations and some other societies. And so this is like the safe space commitment, and this space is like a new space for me. And I'm excited to learn from you guys as well. And so you can go to the next slide. You can, yep. So we're going to go more into this during the Q&A, but we wanted to just give a preview of the New York City Urban Field Station at the friend level of the Safe Space Commitment. We've institutionalized DEIJ internally by bringing DEIJ regularly into our meetings, which we'll go into in more detail. But we've also integrated DEIJ into our programs. We have a monthly Lunch and Learn webinar, or Science of the Living City, where we bring many different speakers to speak on their interdisciplinary work. It can be artists, it can be community partners, and it can be from inside the city or outside the city. We also have an artist in residence program, which I'll actually ask Lindsay to speak a little bit more on later, but there are some DEIJ policies that have been written in some of the selection protocols. And then we also have stewardship salons that are a space for us to gather. We have about 4 a year. And we actually have some of the leaders of past stewardship salons on the call. And that has been a space where we can really try to bring in different perspectives, and especially artistic perspectives, and ways of knowing into our own natural resource management and scientific worlds. Next. Okay, so one of the things that Lindsay mentioned at the top was how the Urban Field Station operates as like a space between our organizations, which for implementing DEIJ in really large bureaucratic organizations that have really kind of hierarchical top-down policies, it's been a space where we can get creative with culture change and get creative from having change come from the bottom up. I'm a scientist, Lindsay's a scientist, Novum is a scientist. And so we don't always have the like administrative power to make policy decisions, but we can try to model through our practice, and also model in terms of the perspectives that we uplift in our work, which is part of what the stewardship salons and Lunch and Learn webinars are about. I'm gonna check my notes real quick. Okay, one last thing I'll say 1 minute. Okay. One last thing I'll say is that a challenge for us has been in the urban field station because it's an in-between space. Who counts as staff has been challenging. It's kind of a space where people come in, they come out, and we're also not an organization. And so it makes it tough to think about things like accountability, especially when experience with DEIJ principles and applying DEIJ is really diverse across the span of people's experiences. So some people go to trainings, others have lived experience, while others are just in different places in terms of their seniority in the organization or the collaborative. So that's a challenge, but it's also a place for a lot of creativity that we can talk more about later.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Sofia Valdez. I am the Community Stewardship Manager for the New York, New Jersey Harbor and Estuary Program. And for the next couple of minutes, I'm just going to go over some of the, I guess, takeaways that we want to share with you as we signed on to the Safe Space Commitment as an ally. If you're not too familiar with HEP, which is short for the New York, New Jersey Harbor and Estuary Program, we are one of 28 national estuary programs in the country. We are essentially housed, or our umbrella organization is the Hudson River Foundation, which is known for just working towards making science like an integral part of just decision making about the Hudson River and its communities. So let's see, where do we start? The Safe Space Commitment launched, I want to say, about a year after we developed this roadmap, which is right in front of you. So I want to say maybe also about 6 months after we also created our DIJ subcommittee meeting, which was created and this map was born after we held a series of conversations around just the need for better representation within our networks. So we had lots of different conversations throughout our work groups and committees, and that gave rise to what now is the DIJ subcommittee, which is pretty much made up of different members of our work groups, primarily the harbor educators and the Citizens Advisory Committee. So when the Safe Space Commitment launched, it was pretty much like a no-brainer for us in terms of why we wanted to sign on. We were already doing a lot of this work internally. And really, the most, I think, important part is that it also helped us keep us in check in terms of just making progress towards the map that you see in here. And I'm not going to go too into detail on, what the map is, but essentially the Safe Space Commitment aligned with the 3 major goals of our map, which are to really start a change from within our organization, make a commitment when it comes to like our resources, our time, and supporting our partners who are also doing that work, and to foster this environment of just self-growth, right? And it's an ongoing journey. So that's really where the Safe Space Commitment aligned with our map. Next slide. So we signed on as an ally, and I'm also not going to go into specific tasks of what an ally, is or requires. But I did just want to provide a few examples of some of the ways that we've been trying to get there. So some of our trainings, for example, have included allyship at work training, which I believe it's presented in 2 different formats, but the one that we participated on was a 3-part training, which took place monthly. And through this training, we got to have bigger conversations, but then also have smaller group discussions. And it gave us a chance to just explore a bunch of different topics, anything from really just defining what allyship means. What are some of the ways that we can practice that within our personal lives and also at work? How are you showing up for your colleagues? It taught us conflict resolution. Like if you're seeing that play out, something that's making your coworkers uncomfortable, how are you showing up for your colleague? How are you actually showing up as an ally during those moments? it taught, it taught us to problem solve creatively speaking. What are some of the ways that you can call people out, or as we'd like to call it in our group, call people in. And it just really provided a lot of different strategies on how to make sure, that growth was happening as we continue to take these sessions. So that was a really great training. Our most recent training that also took place was actually held by the Staten Island Pride Center. I forget if it was an hour and a half or it was an hour, 2 hours. I think it might have been 2 hours, but it was all around just raising awareness about how to be there for members of the LGBTQIA+ community, and just being more aware about issues that a lot of these members are dealing with, and just how to show up essentially, right, and creating your spaces so that they can be more welcoming to support members of the community. And then some of the other ways that we've tried to involve our staff in these learning practices have been film screenings. So we've been showing different documentaries. Some of the topics that we've explored through some of these documentary screenings are, things like gentrification, displacement, what does that look like? Decade of Fire was a really good film that we saw, which is basically based on the fires that were intentional fires that were set off in the South Bronx during the 70s and 80s, which basically displaced so many people of color, right? And what the impacts of that displacement had on people until today, because they were displaced from their homes. So that was a really great film that we saw. We have discussions right after them so that we can discuss our thoughts, questions, what were our major takeaways. And then we also do readings where I want to say we give folks maybe like a week to 2 weeks to get the reading done, and then we get together to discuss what were some of the learning takeaways and what were some of the major things that stuck out. So those are just a few examples of the ways that we've been trying to keep the conversation going within our organization. And next slide. And just like everything, there are challenges, and then there are also lessons learned. When it comes to challenges, I think, these are just some of the ones that came to mind, but I'm sure there's plenty more, and I'm sure Rosanna can add to this list as well. But, I think anybody will tell you that it's challenging work. It requires, at least basic facilitation skills. You have to be able to, kick off the discussions, make people feel welcome, right? That they are allowed to ask questions. And sometimes that can be a little bit difficult, especially if you're not, a big social person who's able to kick off those discussions. So it really is challenging work. It's emotional labor. I think there have been many moments where, we were faced with just difficult situations, and we were left feeling even like a little bit powerless, right? But we've also begun to find ways to maybe like after having a hard discussion or watching like a really hard documentary, to also kind of just like center ourselves back and leave on a positive note, right? And almost like end things in a way that's it's still inspirational and that doesn't make us feel like we can't solve things. Because there is no finish line, sometimes it can seem daunting, overwhelming. You feel like you're constantly working through something that doesn't have an end. But I think, one way that we've been able to get through that is by just, continuing to do it and continuing to remind folks that, we're all doing this. Like we might be at different levels in terms of our work, but that everyone's still learning, right? And the learning just doesn't stop. And I think one other major thing is that it definitely requires more than just one individual to keep, this work going. You need folks that are honestly like dedicated and that want to do this work. I can't imagine having to make this much work and having it fall down on just one person. So I think it definitely, requires dedication, time, and, it requires for that work to be spread among more than just one person. And then so some of our lessons learned is that it is helpful to have a system in place that kind of, keeps you on track, or that at least tells you, hey, maybe there are some areas within our work that we're not making that much progress on. So for us, our roadmap has been helpful. We don't update it too much because you saw how, and that was just a simplified version of it. But we do tend to take a look back at it at least a couple times a year as to make sure that we're recording where some of our major progress was done. And it's just important to foster an environment where everybody feels welcome to ask questions. And again, understand that this is a lifelong journey and that no one is perfect and that people are going to make mistakes. And the important thing is about, centering yourself back and just getting back on the horse essentially, right? It's also helpful to just have like a smaller group so that you can discuss what are some of the ways you can bring in the rest of your group or the rest of your staff, however your structure looks like. For us, it's been helpful to have like those smaller check-ins and then bring in the rest of our staff, from our organization's perspective. But it could be a volunteer group, whatever system you have in place. And I think the last lesson learned is just there's a ton of stuff out there that's already available. And there are a lot of really great people too that are willing to share that information. So yes, there's stuff that's really great. There's stuff that's accessible. There's stuff that's free. That's so important. And I think that we should all be taking advantage of those tools. So I think that's definitely one major lesson learned that I was surprised by actually seeing the amount of resources and just tools that can be easily available to everyone. And I think I just one more slide, which is just like our contact info in case you have any. Yeah. So it looked a lot bigger on screen when I did it. So sorry about that. It looks really tiny there. But if you have any questions on, what it is that where we're up to, I'm sure Rosanna and I would be more than happy. So that's why I added her name on there too. We'd be more than happy to chat or share resources. So please feel free to reach out. Thank you.
I do not have any slides. I'm just going to go off of my notes on my laptop. Sorry about that. I'm Ellie Cariff. If you don't know me, I'm the teaching and curriculum specialist at the Billy Noister Project right now. I am also on many different committees. So I'm going to try really hard to not use too many acronyms. I'm going to say them all out, but I realized my intro is a little bit a history of the DIJ committee and the Safe Space Commitment in ways because I've been connected for a while. But a little bit about me, I was born and raised in Brooklyn and have been working on the Hudson and Harbor for 10 years now, since 2013. I started at the River Project and spent almost 5 years in Yonkers at the Sarah Lawrence College Center for the Urban River at BZAC or CURB. And now I'm at Billy Noister Project. But I started working professionally with DI committees, like so many others, in 2020 after the murder of George Floyd, when many different organizations and groups started springing up actual diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice committees. So personally, I have been fighting for justice my whole life, so this was a very natural meld for me. And while I was working at CURB in Yonkers, I joined the New York State Outdoor Education Association, or NYSOIA's Equity, Access, and Inclusion Committee, EAI committee, in September 2020. So they had actually been the EAI committee for a little while. There's a few other members here today, which is great. And I've been really needing a committee, like something DEI related. And I was actually at a Harbor educators meeting and I was like, what are we doing? When are we doing this? And Rebecca Hauser said, who is the board president of NYSOIA, invited me to that committee. And so I started going to those weekly meetings on Monday nights in September on Labor Day, September 2020. And that was really wonderful work. And I'm only not doing that anymore because I had a baby recently and Monday nights are too hard. But I mean, Christina's here. And, I helped to organize and plan and implement a bunch of panels and workshops, conference talks, events, and all related to equity, access, and inclusion and environmental education. And then also found my pet project, which is equitable pay and environmental education, which probably many of you have already heard me talk about, but we can talk more about that later. And then separately from NYSOIA, I've also been working with NEHA and others on a just language Coalition, where we are thinking about reframing the way we think and talk about science and ecology, specifically focusing now on species management and what we call invasive species, and kind of rethinking the way that we talk and even think about that, really. And that also started in January 2021, but in 2020, again, that same fall that I started in the NYSOIA committee, Rosanna and I were like, we need to do something for the Hudson and Harbor Educators Group. And so we started, sort of co-founded the DEI, the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Justice Subcommittee of the Harbor Educators Group, and also the Citizens Advisory Committee. And we were co-chairs until I went on maternity leave in December 2022. And then last March in 2022, I joined Billy and Oyster Project as the teaching and curriculum specialist, but I've been working with them basically since the beginning in 2014. And I was really thrilled that they had an internal DEI committee, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, that is for BOP staff. My friend Shanara was chairing it at the time, and they were rare in the fact that they actually had the committee long before the unfortunate murder of George Floyd, right? So Robina Taliaferro started it in 2018, and it was a pretty, it was already like a very active group at Billy and Oyster Project. And so while I was there, I joined as many meetings as I could, but I wasn't an official member. And then earlier this year, I was elected chair of that committee. So many different committees that I'm still active on in various ways. But Billy and Oyster Project actually has a really important role in the summit. So I'm really excited that I get to speak on behalf of them, because they were the original authors of the Safe Space Commitment. So in June 2020, Rabina and Tanasia Swift came up with this idea, and they also, with Billy and Oyster Project, wrote the Pledge in the Fight to End Systemic Racism, which is available on our website, and worked with the DEI committee at Billy and Oyster Project to bring it to other groups. So two of the groups they brought it to was the DEIJ subcommittee with me and Rosanna, and also the EAI committee with NYSOIA. And we both, but the DEIJ subcommittee adopted it in early 21, and we worked really hard on it. So we had this amazing text and this idea, and then for those of, hopefully everybody knows, but maybe you don't, what the Safe Space Commitment is, but it's a pledge, but it's not just a pledge, right? It's like, we worked really hard to make sure it wasn't just something that you signed and said like, yay, racism's over, done, but that it was something like we created this tiered participation framework, and that's why we're all here as different participants in this. So Billy and Oyster Project signed on as an accomplice, which is sort of the highest level of the Safe Space Commitment. But so in addition to creating that tiered participation framework, which took many, many, many months of meetings, thank you especially Shino for all of your hard work on that, we also created like an introductory video with the EAI committee, and especially Mary Lynn Malone. We created all of the forms, the resource page, which mostly HEP and HRF did a lot of, and we also really think that it continues to be a work in progress, right? Like, it's never going to be a completely done document, because we're always thinking about how we can improve it, and based on our members' needs and capabilities, we're sort of molding it as we go. And I'm not co-chair anymore, but Rosanna and our new co-chair, finally, Michelle Lufke, are carrying the torch. I'm still a very active member of this committee. So I'm just really excited that we're all here. I feel like I could talk more about, I think we'll have time to talk about challenges and lessons and such, but you know, I was a history major in undergrad, and I think that history is very important when we're thinking about, you know, obviously we don't want to I don't even remember the line right now. Yes, to repeat the same mistakes, right? It's important to look at our history. And so it's also, I think, really useful to think about all of the different people who lit this fire, and who have been, you know, taking their personal beliefs and really making it professional, because the personal, as we all know, is political, and you can't have science without politics. And, you know, having this pledge to fight racism and to be a more inclusive space for everybody, whether that be, you know, folks who have been marginalized for many years in the environmental education field or LGBTQ community, or, you know, I mean, just thinking I'm a new mother and like thinking about accessibility for what that means for me as a nursing mom and somebody who needs to pump and, you know, takes a stroller down the street now. And like, you know, I think there's a really, I'm having all of these new lenses of personal ways that I think, you know, I'm reframing my own narrative. So I will pause there. I have no idea what I'm doing on time, and I'll pass it to Sailor, who, by the way, also I'm so pumped is on our committee. So thank you.
The word sitting. Can I like wander around? No, you do what I want. Hi, I'm Sailor, they, them. I feel like I don't have any slides either. Sorry, y'all. But I should have had one that said like a little bit about me, ... and then like a nice portrait where you're like, you know, like, I'm trans non-binary and I'm neurodiverse. So a lot of times I pull in a lot of stuff and you're like, where are they going right now? And then it goes somewhere. So that's what we're gonna do. I'm the co-chair of Surf Rider Foundation New York City chapter. We're all volunteers and I'm a volunteer. Is anyone here a volunteer or like managing volunteers, leading volunteers? Yeah, a volunteer specifically for like whatever you're here about. Yeah. Okay, cool. I just kind of wanted to know. Hi, Pamela. So
hi, how
yeah.
are you?
Hey, great. So we're all volunteers, and the little about me, I just wanted to kind of, so I'm from Rochester, New York. My whole family worked in the Kodak factory, as we do, although we don't anymore because it's gone. Are you from Rochester? Woo, Kodak. I grew up sandwiched between an aging nuclear plant called Ginna, which is still up there. It's in the middle of like all the Concord grape fields. And then you're like, oh, a nuclear plant. And Kodak, which is in Rochester because there's a river that flows north. And so they use that water for lots of things. When I was growing up, my dad was always like, oh, if you go by where the river flows out, you can like take it and you can actually develop pictures with it. And I was like, oh, that's awesome, Dad. And now I'm like, what? Like, but we grew up and there's like nuclear sirens, and I distinctly remember them going off and like bunny men walking around in our yard, you know. So I grew up with like a real link between like what is going on with people in the country who are just like struggling to get by day to day, and what is going on with people in the city who are struggling to get by day to day. And both of us are getting like on our cars when we wake up in the morning, little flyers that say like, here's a free car wash. You should go get your car washed. And we're like, okay, because there's like releases and spills all the time and stuff. So that's where my grounding in environmental justice comes from. It just is like, I don't know anything else. I've been doing it my whole life. And how I found this committee is that I'm a core, my team is a core with the Stop the Williams Pipeline Coalition from a few years back. And like in the thick of it, I was going to the Harbor Estuary Conference program every year. And in the thick of it, one time I was like, you know, raging as you do when you're fighting fossil fuel industry people. And I went to the conference and everyone was like, you know, all the presentations are great. And like, I love being around the science, but I just felt like, and I knew like a bunch of the people, like groups that had took like Williams money. And I was just kind of like, oh. And in the meantime, Surfrider National, which I'll get to, had already started doing like trying to do equity work because we were pushing them, because we were like, look, we're involved in this coalition, like you guys don't have the tools to roll with us, like we can't invite you to things like anything, so we're doing this on our own. And then I saw that there was the bystander intervention training, and I was like, who is doing this? And I found out, and then I was like, can I please join? So that's how I got involved. And at this point, I'm like just so grateful for y'all and y'all, because like I can take everything I'm learning from what y'all are doing and like bring it to my team and bring it to our bigger organization, and like vice versa. I think that it's been very fluid, which is great. So Surfrider Foundation in New York are all volunteers. It's a national organization, NGO, based in Orange County, California, which presents some challenges just on its own culturally. And then there's about 120 chapters around the continental US, in Hawaii and Puerto Rico, and then there's some international affiliates. So the chapters are all volunteer run and are kind of free to do whatever they want. There's certain programs and campaigns that like the national level will kind of be like, hey, it'd be great if you could do this. And like, maybe you do, maybe you don't, but it's up to you. And then if you have local stuff you want to get involved in, you do. That leads to a lot of interesting dynamics in terms of equity work, because like, for example, we have chapters down south and it's coastal residents who really care about their environment, but they're like straight up MAGA people. So like, so it's, you have to meet everyone where they are, right? But you also have to be like, well, and like Surfrider National, for example, had I don't think it was a conference. I'm not entirely sure what it was, but I got a lot of reports back from a lot of my allies and cohorts that they had invited some surfing groups, like BIPOC surfing groups, to come speak. And like some members or volunteers stood up and were like, I don't understand like what this has to do with Surfrider. Like, why are you here? Like, I don't, and you know, just like, so it's a wild scene to be going into. So that's kind of the background. So our chapter being in New York City, we end up interacting a lot and actively seek out working in coalitions. So like a plastics coalition, pipelines coalition. We're like trying to kind of push a little mission creep to like work upstream with people a little bit. I live in Far Rockaway. I moved there right after Sandy, like a moth to a flame. I just couldn't help myself. And I love it. But also it's a frontline community. So like me and some other volunteers who live out there, we're just every day, we're just like, woo, because everything's right in our face, like all the time. Like we're getting dunes rebuilt. Like it's you know, they're hardening the Bayside, like all this crazy stuff. So like we try to partner a lot with like civic groups and stuff out there. And it was interesting starting work there. And this falls in with equity too, that this is a frontline community that kind of everyone was ignoring until something terrible happened. And then, oh my God, Rockaway, save Broad Channel, save Howard Beach. So when I moved out there, I had heard of Surfrider, and I had heard that they were just like surfer bros who walked around in t-shirts being like, I'm a Surfrider. And like, that's what everybody thought. So like when I joined up, I tried to, our old co-chair, Nikita, who had to move back to Scotland during COVID, which is wild. But we tried to just kind of like show up, which is the best way to start being an ally, right? You just like quietly show up and like see where you can plug in holes. So that's what we did for years. And eventually people were like, oh, you guys are all right. You show up. We're like, great. So now it's gotten a lot easier to kind of like work with people and get work done and stuff. But it took a lot of patience, which like, everyone's been saying, like, you don't know what the end game is. Like there is no end game, and like you just have to like stick to it and keep going and going. So Ellie gave me a great word yesterday because I had asked for help on like what to actually talk about given the framework I'm working in, which is a bit different than everybody else's. And they were like, she was like, I just misgendered you, I'm sorry. she was like, well, you kind of sound, because I'm like an organizer and I'm also an activist, I'm also an advocate. She's like, you kind of sound more like an agitator at this point, like from the labor movement. I was like, you're right, I am. So what happened was, so in New York, we were working on all this stuff and like really diligently like, trying to be great allies, because our organization is mostly like cis het white people, like of a certain privilege, because that's what surfers tend to be, which is really unfortunate because it's a really colonized sport. Like that's not, it was originally for like solving conflict without violence in the Polynesian Islands, you know? But now it's like broy. So I don't know what to do with that. So we worked really hard to like get our chapter to a point where like members could engage with people in a way that was like helpful and not harmful. And we spent years doing that. And then we would ask for help or resources or like, you know, like lawyer help, things that like HQ had staff for, like policy help, like things that were volunteers. We don't have this baseline knowledge maybe because none of us actually work in the environmental field for the most part. Like I work in home health care and I'm a bartender. Like it's not like, so, and we smacked right into kind of a national organization that didn't have any sort of equity infrastructure in place to not even support us, but to like roll with us, right? They had started, but so what we did was we kind of realized we had to be agitators. So before George Floyd got murdered, Surfrider had actually Surfrider National had started being like, you know what, like, I think we do need to do more equity work. And it kind of started because they had this marketing campaign that came out of nowhere called it was like the United States and Oceans of America. And the symbol looked like a Blue Lives Matter flag. And we were like, how did this get through? Like, what? Like, and it was just dropped. And we were like, we can't use this. Like, here's why. And so some other chapters too were like, we can't use this. So that was kind of a catalyst for the national level to be like, oh, wait, maybe we need to take a look at like what we're doing. And so what we've done, and I've taken a lot from this group, is we've kind of been the agitators along with a couple other chapters and been like, hey, like, we need community agreements for meetings because you have all these like older cishet white men just talking away, you know, like we need community agreements. We need, thank you. Oh, wow, really? Okay, let me make sure I got to everything here. No, I did. We need like yeah. Oh, like we're trying to get like affinity groups, but they don't want to do that because they don't want to be like turned into like a gripe session. And we're like, that's not what affinity groups are. But you know, it's slow. It's one of my allies on one of my working teams was like, it's like turning a cargo ship. It'll happen. It's just gonna, you know, take a while, like get 3 miles. I'm like, yes, that is what it feels like. So thanks a lot. And I just want to thank everybody again. And that's kind of our thing, and wanted to bring the volunteer perspective and also we're on a journey because we are.
All right, well, thank you. I'm not gonna stand because like I feel awkward standing above you all in a moderated Q&A. So thank you each for talking about your personal and organizational structures and your journey. I really appreciate it. So one question I have for you all is how are you all meeting the goals within the tiers of the safe space commitment that your organization signed up for? And are these goals reasonable, and have they helped with your organization's journey or even your own personal journey? Anyone could take it first.
As the chair of the DEI committee at Billy Noiser Project, it's been very helpful to have the tier participation framework. Like we've had 2 meetings in the last 2 weeks with the leadership team to go through what we've signed up for the safe space commitment. And I literally made it a checklist like, okay, we're doing this, we've done this, we are still working on this. And that has been really helpful because it was also great to see that a lot of what leadership has been doing was without the agitation of the DEI committee, right? Like they're engaging with consultants and working, you know, working on things. And the DEI committee definitely helps with that. Like we bring, you know, a couple of learning labs to our team a few times a year. And so that way we're able to like Just Language spoke last fall as a workshop so that we hit some of those, you know, like I wish we had the framework up, but some of those benchmarks of, you know, you need to participate in this many workshops and this amount of, you know, I think 90% of our leadership team or board members are supposed to be doing those. So that kind of thing is really is in conjunction with the DEI committee and leadership. But I realized too, it's nice to have that. It's just nice to have something to look at and say, okay, we are doing something. And, you know, I think the original goal from the DEIJ subcommittee was not to be gatekeepers, but to help be facilitators. And now that I'm in the role of facilitating this at my organization, I do find that it's really helpful to have that.
Lindsay, go ahead.
Great. Can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
Okay. I'll just take this moment to elaborate on some of the pieces that Neha already raised. You know, we're just at the friend level, I guess the starting out level, and it has been helpful to us. We meet as a boundary organization. Sometimes it's been monthly, sometimes bi-monthly. Right now we've settled on quarterly, and that actually really fits with having 4 readings a year. So we integrate a safe space check-in like into our agenda. So just the point of like not signing a commitment and walking away, but having it regularized and built in, it's a moment to collectively read and discuss a reading that connects to our mission. We also share trainings and resources voluntarily, like to the point that Liz raised about there's a lot that's already out there. And I think given that we're both in government agencies, the trainings that we are required to do are really kind of compliance-based. You know, they're focused on civil rights and EEO, and I see it as really like a floor. They're not steeped in anti-racism. So there's definitely unevenness. You know, some folks engage with these resources more than others. And I think just even preparing for this session has made me realize we could push harder on the sort of individual accountability side around trainings and getting beyond readings. But really the way we've integrated and shared these lessons is through those programs that Neha shared. Our lunch and learns, it's like our staff is who it is. Like I mentioned, a fairly white dominated space, a lot of like senior people. And we use those lunch and learns to bring in early career folks, to bring in practitioners, to bring in diverse perspectives that we wouldn't otherwise hear. So it's a way to sort of widen our circle. And those aren't just, you know, finished work. It then feeds our science and it feeds our management and it feeds the questions that we asked. The arts program that we have, and I shared a link in the chat, you know, we built an actual DEI audit process into the artist selection, again, as a way to not only bring a new perspective from artists, but to bring in folks who have really different lived experiences from us. And you can just look at the stories and the bios of the artists that we're engaging with here in New York and across our field station network nationally. And again, those artists aren't just producing work from our science. It's meant to be transdisciplinary, where we're learning from each other, posing new questions, sharing methodologies and approaches, and really connecting with the public in ways quite different from just writing a journal article. And the last one I'll expand on is the stewardship salons, which I never used the term community agreement, but that's essentially what we start those all with. We have really explicit ground rules. We try to create a safer space or a brave space. We try to shed hierarchies, which can be really hard to do in government spaces, but to say that everyone has something to teach and to learn when they enter into these stewardship salons, which are essentially place-based co-learning opportunities, again, between artists, scientists, and land managers. And we try and lift up less told stories about the land. We try to make space for maybe historically marginalized folks. And again, those questions, those experiences feed our science and our management practices. So I think we're doing well on integrating learnings, and I think we're a little uneven on the trainings, and I'm really like taking tips from all of you on how to do more. I spoke a lot, but Neha, if you want to add anything from your perspective.
She said you did great. Does anyone else on the panel want to answer that?
I mean, I don't really know where else there is to add. I think Lindsay and Ellie covered it. It is helpful in a sense that it helps you
Oh.
stay on track.
Why don't you keep that mic there and I'll
Yeah.
pass this mic over.
Yeah, it definitely does help you keep on track. I think like maybe when you're first signing on, it does seem like, oh my gosh, how am I going to fit all this in when I have so much work to do? Because I am sure everyone in here feels like they don't already have a lot of time. But yeah, like when you take it kind of like in pieces, I think it just becomes more manageable. And as long as you're prioritizing it along with the rest of your work, I think it becomes something that's just more tangible and doesn't seem so, you know, far away. So I'll just leave it at that.
We signed on as our chapter specifically signed on as
We're on a journey.
we're on a journey, which we are. And as volunteers, it's really hard because our changeover is so fast. Like our EC, people stick around actually like a couple years. One of us has been here for 19 years. I've been there for 14, but then there's some people, you know, months, but then like the on the ground volunteers that I know in other chapters, it's just so Surfrider HQ, when they've started doing some of the things that were recommended, they found it to be really hard because they'll pay for these trainings and stuff at like the annual conference, like regional conferences where all the volunteers come or like online, and then the people are gone. So like, it's really hard to build up any consistency. I think in our chapter, we are trying to lead by example because we do have such changeover. So my co-chair Mo and I were very specifically like try to do things and say like, does this fit within our equity lens? What do y'all think? And like eventually people get the language and they know what we're talking about. So like we don't have to keep pushing and they can take it and run. So yeah, I think so. I lead by example when you're on a journey.
That's great. Thank you, guys. So my next question, I think you guys kind of touched a little bit on that in your response to the first question, but really on how does the tier framework kind of help with accountability? Does it help with accountability on not just your organization but also personally? And then I'm going to add to that in, what are the challenges when you're looking to quantify your accountability, right? Like, how are you, like, what are you faced with, like, when you're working with your organization in this space? How are you framing your accountability with your organization, right? Because in every tier, we do try to encourage, a certain percentage of staff and then senior staff that get involved in these conversations. So what are those challenges to get to those different tiers and what you're looking to accomplish there, and how do you address accountability?
Yeah, I can kick things off on that one. And I think I spoke to some of the challenges we've experienced so far on my slides too. But I think the challenges is that, again, like it's really a lot of work. And if you don't have a support system within your organization, whatever that looks like, right, it's going to be hard, and consistency is key. And so, I think we've had moments where, if something falls off my radar, Rosanna is there to kind of like catch things up, right? Or vice versa. We also bring in the rest of our staff who can be like, you guys said you were going to do this, right? Like, when is this happening? So I think it is kind of just like having a system that does, call you out or call you in, depending on how you want to see it. And, that asks for more. I think we've been in a really lucky position that everyone we're working with has been extremely responsible at being engaged. We do technically make our trainings, like optional. But, till this day, we've never had anyone say like, hey, I don't feel comfortable participating in this, or, anything of that sort. I'm not saying it's not going to happen, things change. And, so, when that time comes, I'm sure it's also going to be a learning step for us to learn how to overcome that. But yeah, I think like the main challenge is just like, again, being that there's only so much time and we have so many responsibilities, it can be hard for some things to fall off the radar, but consistency is key. So just having a support system that's able to kind of, be there for you and help you split, the homework essentially that you set for yourself has been really important for us. So.
And I just want to add that I think one other challenge is that when you're in an organization with a lot of people in different departments and there's so much field work involved, it can be a little difficult sometimes to remember that DEI needs to be embedded into everything you're doing. It's not something that's separate. And I do think that, one thing Billion Oyster Project does really well is the DEI committee meets on work time. It is part of our jobs. And I think that's really important. That sends a really important message to staff that this is not something that you do extra outside of work. And that was something that I struggled with a little bit in the EAI committee for NYSOIA, because we were doing it on Monday nights and a lot of people weren't supported by their staff. So they were doing it on their own personal volunteer time. And I feel like I've been very lucky to be so supported by my supervisors and leadership at the last 2 jobs that I've had in order to do this DEI work, especially, with Billion Oyster Project, we do so much community outreach and we do so much work with community members. And so really making sure that everybody has buy-in within our organization, that DEI work has to be part of our work in order to make us better community members and better at encouraging community access to the waterfront and really breaking down other barriers. So that's something that is a consistent conversation. And I think it's, it can just be tough to meet, like when, you know, a team has a deadline and they need to get millions of oysters in the water by a certain time. Like it's harder for some staff in certain departments to actually, you know, partake in the learning labs or the workshops that we're offering, or, you know, to sort of allow staff to kind of take a flex day to do a DEI volunteer opportunity or something. So just, you know, I think that there's always going to be those kind of tricky balancing challenges. But at the same time, like those, having the more check-ins you have, the more you can remind and embed the idea that this is part of everyone's job, and it's not just the DEI committee that's saying like, okay, we're doing the diversity stuff, everybody else, you don't have to do this, right? So like make sure that we're doing those check-ins and we're holding the whole organization accountable.
So I don't think I have too much to add on the organizational accountability stuff. I think that Liz and Ellie really covered it. Protecting time, I think, is really important, because there's just like, at least from an organizational and government, there's a lot of fires that need to be put out or managed. But I wanted to share a little bit more about the personal accountability and like how I'm starting to think about personal accountability in my work. Speaking to what Ellie said about how it's not just something that you do, it's actually embedded in how you do everything. And I've been thinking about accountability for myself, more so about like relational accountability and how do we make sure that we're in right relationship. And so for me, because we all have limited capacity, like I've been focusing my efforts on, one was like understanding my own experiences in white dominated spaces, but also to like help and mentor others within that space, and really checking in with people that are on the marginalized side of you know, a staff population. Like, how are you feeling? Like, what does this feel like? And having those kind of relationships and conversations hold me accountable in how that feels and how other people are feeling in those spaces. Because a lot of DEIJ work is done so that people of marginalized identities can feel more belonging. But the metrics are very difficult because the infrastructure has not necessarily been built. And so a lot of it, I feel, is like personal check-ins, because especially coming from an organizational standpoint, it's really difficult, which also speaks to what Sailor was saying about affinity groups and how important those are, because the real true feelings don't always get expressed in, you know, DEIJ committees or discussions, depending on the trust level in that group. And then the other thing that I want to mention is that I think in terms of community partnerships, I think the same thing goes, like how does that community member feel about how an event went? And I was checking in with that relationship and making sure that their needs are met. I think in a government setting, it can be difficult because things just kind of move forward. And so how do we always make sure that we check in with the people that we're in relationship with the organizations that we're in relationship with, especially when there are different power dynamics involved, which I'm really excited that we'll be talking more about later.
Yeah, actually, you said something I was thinking too, which is that checking in on people, like as an inside agitator, but an outside observer to what is going on with our with our community. I can say that I know exactly who to go to on staff when I feel like crying, or like, and they know that I'm carrying like, oh, I'm gonna cry right now, but they know I'm carrying like a lot of extra stuff just because of who I am existing in this space. So I really appreciate it when I can, like, they don't always be like, how are you feeling? Because I'm like, fine, I don't know, I'm autistic, I don't know what to tell you right now. But like, I do know, I like knowing that I can go to them. And I'll also say that I also checking in with groups that you've worked with is awesome. And we try to do it all the time. And one of the challenges I think that the national organization is having is that the feedback they get is not like, you did a great job. The feedback is like, it was really uncomfortable. And they're like, and don't know what to do with it. So I think a challenge is, you know, actually being open to feedback when you get feedback that you actually don't want because you think you did a great job, but you might not have. Like, we've gotten it. It's, you know, that's hard to deal with. And then also, if you feel like you you know, you're aware that one of your colleagues is like struggling or like is really carrying a lot, but you don't quite know, like you can't get in their shoes, like you don't have their lived experience and all that. Our CFO is actually the head of our equity committee and work and stuff, and she's a pretty contained person. But as she's been working with me over the years, I think she's kind of noticed that I'm just sometimes like, and like she cannot relate to me at all. But she does like send me little like thinking of you, how are you cards and stuff. And like I really appreciate it. Cause so like I think just like letting colleagues, even if you act, you know, just know that you're thinking of them. It sounds cheesy, but for me at least it really helped.
Could I add, or you want to move on, Rosanna?
You can add if you'd like.
Oh, sure. Well, just echoing a lot of the themes, but I was also thinking about accountability personally, and I kind of I realized I sort of had 3 R's. Regularize relationships and like pause and reflect. And regularizing, we've already talked about, like building in work time for this on a regular basis. And I already mentioned our quarterly meetings, but like many others, after the murder of George Floyd, my research group started a monthly reading group to really kind of shift what we're reading, because if we're only reading, you know, science from white male scientists, then we're going to sort of reproduce that science, and that like directly has helped to slowly. Somebody mentioned the cargo ship. I think that was Sailor. There's probably no bigger cargo ship than the federal government, but it's helped like turn our little piece of it a bit. And then on relationships, you know, our staff that we have in hand are who we are. I have fewer people of color in my immediate workspace, so I have to build those relationships, like Neha said, very intentionally and slowly, through reading, through learning, through programs and relationships, through honoring people's expertise. And I try to really do that relationship building thoughtfully and learn from others who are more expert than me. And on the pause and reflect, like everyone's talked about the fast pace, we all go too fast. I had the chance to, which doesn't happen often for me, be involved in a hiring process. And I realized things were going really quickly. We were using an existing interview protocol. We'd gone through a round of interviews, and I was like, wait, stop. We really didn't ask about DEI and equity work as a core competency, which like we're thinking about it through the lens of the identities of the people we're trying to hire. And it's like, regardless of your lived experience, this is a core competency. So I took the time to find some resources and add some questions and do a second round of interviewing. And it really, I think, helped change the outcome of who we hired. So just, it was a learning moment. I felt like it was almost a mistake, but like that pause and reflect in the moment gave me space to change. So I just wanted to share that vulnerability a little bit too. Yeah, that's it.
And I just wanted to add on to that went very well with it's Lindsay, right? What Lindsay just said is that our DIJ subcommittee actually did a very similar thing last year. So, you know, it's really important to be able to take feedback and stop and rethink the way that you're doing things, even if you don't like the feedback, and especially I think if you don't like the feedback and if it makes you uncomfortable, right? Because I think that's something that we all need to remember, is that, you know, especially as cishet white people, we have the privilege of going through our daily lives very comfortably. And part of doing this DIJ work is to make ourselves sit with the discomfort of knowing that our privilege has a negative impact on many, many people. And so, you know, thinking about how we can be vulnerable, and we can and should really take that feedback and change the way that we do things based on the feedback that we're getting from our community members and folks in our groups is really important part of accountability.
Lindsay, can you say one of the questions you added into the interview? I was like super curious.
Oh, I have to go look it up. I got like a battery of questions, but it was, you know, open-ended opportunity for candidates to share how they had advanced equity and inclusion either in their workplaces or in their communities. I think that was one of the open-ended lead-off ones. because it's not always visible in people's, we're hiring postdocs. So they had like these very academic CVs and writing samples, and maybe they have an equity like statement in their cover letter, but this was a chance for them to really share their story, and do a bit of what we're doing, do some storytelling about situating themselves and where they kind of are on that journey. So, but yeah, I can share the whole set of like competency-based questions that I got. They're not only about DEIJ, they're also about like teamwork, receiving feedback, a lot of the topics that we're talking about now.
That'd be great, Lindsay. So just so that we can go back on to schedule and make sure we have enough time for the training, I want to thank all the speakers. I know I had a couple more questions for you, and I'm sure others in this room and online have questions, but I want to thank you all for your time. We're going to do a 10-minute break. I'm going to ask the speakers if it's okay if I can share your emails with this group, so that way if you did have questions, feel free to reach out to them directly. And then for those of you in the room, you see these faces, feel free to approach, have a conversation, ask questions, and we'll get started back here at 11:05. So feel free to stretch your legs, use the restrooms, fill up on more caffeine or water or other drinks that are available, and we'll get started at 11:05. Thank you again, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Everyone, here is how it's gonna work. We've split the tables out. We're gonna be sitting in groups of 4 per single table. So I don't want to see anybody at that big table in the back. Everybody who was sitting at that table will have to find another table of 4 people per table, please. You can stay here. Actually, no, that's okay. I'll just carry this around. Does it work on? Yeah, I can. Oh, you can? Yeah. Oh. The only reason I have a hard time having somebody else do it is because I have like lines that needs to be click, 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 but I don't remember which one's what.
Yeah, whatever.
So it's, but maybe what I'll do though, can I? So is this?
Do it on that one, you would, it's not connected.
It's not.
But I can present off of mine or you.
No, this works, right? It's just the arrow key is funky.
Yeah, I think you need to do the click. So I think if I.
Yeah, I can just do it from here. Yeah. Okay, do we have tables of 4 people at every table? Excellent. Okay. Sierra, are we good to go? Thank you. All right. So welcome everyone. Welcome back. Navigating. Folks on the Zoom, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. All right. So we're going to get started. So this is navigating power dynamics when they get messy. So I'm hoping you're all ready for that. And please forgive me for some clunky manipulation here. Never done hybrid workshops like this before. Just bear with me. The other one. Left. That's what I thought I did. Oh, here we go. Okay. Oh my God. This is going to be interesting. Okay. On the left, right? Yeah. Okay. So around your table, not for the whole room, name, pronouns, title, and organization, just very quick. And folks in the Zoom, please put that in the chat. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes to introduce yourself at your table. Go. What the hell? I didn't even touch the arrow though. Maybe we should switch to your computer. Yeah, let's do that. Okay, thank you.
No, she has. You emailed it to me, right?
And we also have Karen too.
Maybe we can go through the drive shared with me. That's the run of show.
But the run of show is linked up.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. The run of show has a
It
link.
is linked up, right?
Yeah, right there. Yeah.
No problem. I don't need it. And if Nova needs it too, feel free to share.
Awesome. You're awesome. Oh, now I can do, and now I can do arrows, right?
So much, bring it over there.
Yes.
Stand there.
Okay, folks. Thank you for that quick icebreaker intro. Moving on. Okay. I'm going to start with facilitator introduction. I am Shino. I'm the executive director of the New York City Soil and Water Conservation District, member of the HEP DEIJ subcommittee of the Harbor Educators. I'm messing up all the orders of the words. You get the idea. I'm a member of the committee, and I have been doing this anti-racist, anti-oppression work and journey for quite some time. And I volunteered to offer this session. You're actually the guinea pigs. And also the remote people, I'm sorry, you're the total guinea pigs today because I've never done this hybrid. I'm going to introduce Vivian now.
Thank you, Shino. My name is Vivian Orland, and I am the former Manhattan High School superintendent. And I was a partner in crime as an insider in a large system working with Shino on anti-racism work. And that's how we know one another. And she invited me to just sort of co-facilitate and be her partner again today. Really excited to be here in this space.
Thank you, Vivian. Okay, so goals for today. We're going to understand what power dynamics are, which most of you do anyway, but we're going to be adding some layers to that. Recognize power dynamics at play, which you're also very good at, except there are going to be layers added onto that. And hopefully you're going to learn some tools to navigate challenging power dynamics. So this training is actually based on my work with a consultancy firm called the Osborne Group. They actually work with nonprofits on strategic planning and now expanding into doing DEIJ work. And I'm a sub-consultant to them. But this is work that was actually developed by Robert Osborne and Laurel McCombs of the Osborne Group. So I'm just giving them credit for the work they've done. So what we will cover, what is a power dynamic? Social identities and power dynamics. This is where things get really complicated. And navigating challenging power dynamics. I'm not going to show you how to do it, but we're going to start to explore how we can collectively think about some tools. And we're also going to explore some examples, actually one example for this session of a scenario. It's a hypothetical scenario based on a real experience or real experiences. So that's how we're going to do this. Our approach, and this is where the remote people are the total guinea pigs, because we do this as a participatory workshop. We also do this as conversational. We're going to be talking to each other today. And it's going to be emotional for some of you. It may not be, but it could be. So these are the approaches that we use because we actually need to get in touch with our emotions to do some of this work. There's just no way around that. There will be some new content knowledge, but that's really not what this workshop is about. It's really about learning based on your lived experiences. You're going to be drawing from what you already know. And what you're going to be doing is looking at what you already know through a different lens. So it's really shifting your perspective and how to make sense of your lived experiences through a different lens or multiple lenses. And really reframing your understanding. That's what this workshop is hoping to do. So we'll see how that goes. But this really means all of you are going to be participants, active participants. So we're going to start with a very quick community agreement. This one is super important. Expect and accept no closure. You're not going to end this workshop thinking, oh, right, I know how to navigate all messy power dynamics. That's not going to happen. You might actually have more questions than you came in here with. That's okay, but expect that. It's not going to feel good at the end of the workshop necessarily in terms of feeling things are resolved. You may actually have a lot of unresolved feelings and thoughts and ideas, but that's okay. That's part of the process. Lean into discomfort. I think Ellie already said this this morning. It's really important for us to feel comfortable feeling uncomfortable. And if you're not feeling uncomfortable, you may not be pushing yourself enough. And if you're not feeling uncomfortable, you may not be learning enough. What's said here stays here. What's learned here leaves here. We're going to be having table discussions. People may be sharing their personal experiences and personal stories. You should learn from those stories, but do not go outside of this room, start talking to your friends about, you know what, so-and-so just said this and this. That's not cool, right? What you learn here, you should definitely share. But what you hear is private, confidential information that you should keep to yourself. Listen to understand, not to respond. When somebody says something that's really hard for you to listen to, our tendency is actually to start to think about, but okay, I'm going to respond this way, I'm going to respond that way. You get defensive. You should try not to do that. You should really try to listen to understand. And maybe you shouldn't take things so personally. That's one of the ways you can deal with that, is to stop taking things personally and just listen to the person, to really try to understand what that person is saying. Trust, intent, acknowledge impact. I think we all know this, but our natural defensive position, when somebody says, you hurt me, you go to that place of, oh, but I didn't mean to, right? We know you don't mean to hurt other people, because I mean, if you're actually intending to hurt people, then you should just leave the room. We're all here because we want to do good. So our intent is clear. We want to improve ourselves. But sometimes you end up hurting people. That's okay. Sometimes you step on people's toes by mistake, but you're still hurting that person. So you have to own that outcome. So the impact of your actions, whether you intended or not, is something that you have to acknowledge. Take space, make space. Some people are really good at talking and sharing. Some people are less good at doing that. Make sure at your table, everybody has a chance to speak. Doesn't mean you have to force people to speak, but if you find yourself speaking too much, just make space for other people to chime in. Read the cues around your table. I didn't put this on here, but it's also very important. Be kind to yourself, especially if you have a marginalized identity or marginalized identities. Some of the conversations might be really difficult. And while I say lean into your discomfort, I don't want you to feel harmed in this process. So at one point, if any point you feel being harmed or otherwise really difficult to navigate the space, please feel free to just quietly get up and do what you need to do to take care of yourself. I don't want people being harmed by this process, and I do want you to be kind to yourself. Okay. Any questions or additions to the community agreement? All right, we're good to go then. What is a power dynamic? We're going to do a turn and talk. So Vivian, take us through the prompt.
Great, thanks, Sheena. So find a partner at your table. I think everyone is just right. You got 4 people, so grab a partner and let's, like, maybe for this turn and talk, maybe somebody that you're just closest to, right, that you're sitting next to, and maybe think first, before you just sort of jump into it, the following 2 questions. What are some examples of power dynamics in your life? And then what kind of power dynamics are they? Are they negative? Are they positive? Are they neutral? You could take like just maybe 30 seconds before you start just talking and think about the prompt. Just take 30 seconds. Okay. Grab your partner and start talking.
Will we get paired off, or are we just staying in a group? I assume someone there is going to mute us. Is anyone facilitating the virtual part? Maybe not.
I do know Anna from BOP was around and then had to leave again. So I'm not sure anybody's facilitating this part. It's just open conversation with who's ever around.
Okay. I hope we're not like projecting into the room big and loud. Somebody will mute us if we keep talking, I guess. Hard to do it not in pairs, but maybe just a couple people will chat.
I'm happy to participate in this little virtual roundtable conversation.
Cool. You want to go?
Yeah, I mean, the first one that just came to mind, especially thinking about the workplace, is just like hierarchy of roles and direct reports and supervisors and how that comes into play. And that can be both positive and neutral. I think of one way of it being a positive thing. The way I like to think of it is being in a position to really like advocate and empower other people, especially in like a supervisory role.
I could go next. I don't know. I took it in a really different direction. I guess I went to a really personal place. So that's the first thing that came into my head, but I was thinking about the very complicated power dynamics of mothers and daughters. I am a daughter and a mother. I have a lot of love for my mom, but I think I can get into really a mode of trying to like please, which can be really a little toxic. And I have a 5-year-old daughter, and I'm trying to figure out how to kind of break that cycle and not reproduce that. And yet, you know, she's becoming more school age. I'm starting to have a lot of feelings around like friendships and accomplishments. And you can just see how the way we're raised, we bring a lot of that to the way we raise children. So I don't have any answers there. Resources welcome, but.
Okay, we want to be cognizant of time and just make sure everyone has a chance to speak. So
Go ahead, say it again.
we want to be cognizant of time. So 30 seconds and you can wrap up your last thought. Thank you.
I'm done.
I can share. I was also kind of thinking personal as well. Thinking about my older sister who, when I was young, she's 16 years older than me. And there was sort of a power dynamic there. In a way, I was sort of like a daughter figure to her, and how that's really changed over the years as I've gotten older. And there's less power, but more of a sibling relationship.
I guess something that I think of a lot as like a white trans masculine person is how different power dynamics within the trans community, and then broader within the queer community, and then just out in society, and how it's been a very interesting experience seeing how as I started to present more masculine, how that changes how people present me or people treat me. And sometimes positive, sometimes negative, depending on like if they're how they're perceiving
Okay,
me.
last thoughts.
It's been interesting to navigate for sure.
Hello, hello.
Test. Testing. Oh, you know what? It's because we have this off.
Oh.
We need this on for your speaker to work. Here.
Okay.
That's why. You can now you can do it.
Okay, everybody, we're gonna move on. And for folks who are not physically present, if at any point you have a question or you want to make a comment, just enter something in the chat because we're going to be monitoring the chat.
Okay, we'll have time to share in other places during the workshop, so we're going to move on. So power dynamics, I'm just going to show you a couple definitions. The way in which power impacts the interactions of two or more people or groups. That's sort of the generic definition. Power dynamics can be neutral, negative, or positive. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. By the way, folks on Zoom, if you have questions or comments, you can either put it in the chat or you can raise your hand and we can try to unmute. But chat would be probably better. Thanks. Okay. This is one of the more important things that we all should remember. The impact of power is often invisible to those who have it. Those who wield it can be unaware. If you have power, you're unaware you have power. That's how the power dynamic works. And that is something that is very, very important for all of us, regardless of identities that we wear, because we all have privilege in one way or another. We should remember that. So there are different types of power dynamics, and the one that everybody's pretty familiar with is the positional power. That is the relationship between donor, funder, and fundraiser or executive director. If you're in the nonprofit sector, you do fundraising, you know the power imbalance in those relationships, right? Donors and funders wield a lot of power over you as fundraiser or executive director. Board member and staff, if you're a nonprofit governed by the board members have quite a bit of power over staff. If they tell you to do something, you usually do it. Supervisor, supervisee. That's a very easy and simple power dynamic we all understand. Client and customer, service provider. This could be students and teachers that you serve as an environmental education service provider. That is a slightly complicated power dynamic because students tend to be younger than you, which has a very different power dynamic, but teachers are actually your clients and students are your clients too. A little bit complicated. Teacher, instructor, and students, again, this can be interesting, but it's a very clear power dynamic in many instances, particularly in classroom situations. If you're the educator, you're standing up front and telling people what to do, what not to do. So that's a power dynamic. These are the ones that we are very familiar with. For instance, you have asked your supervisor to review a report a week ago. She still has not given you comments or notes. The deadline to submit the report is 2 days from today. That is a power dynamic that I'm sure some of you are laughing because you've been there, done that. You have a proposal for funding due tomorrow. You just received a call from your board chair who tells you he needs a brief description of the education program for a potential donor. Some of you may have this experience as well. It's tricky, right? Do you tell your supervisor, I need that report tomorrow? Well, some of you have that kind of relationship with your supervisor and you can do that. A lot of you may not have that relationship where you can go to your supervisor and say, hey, look, I need that report. So you're in this conundrum. So these are the positional power dynamics that we are familiar with. So what we're going to do, though, is to complicate those power dynamics by introducing social identities, or actually not even introducing, recognizing social identities as added layers that complicate those already complex power dynamics. Social identity is an individual's sense of who they are based on which social groups they belong to. Social identities may allow individuals to have a sense of belonging. But some social identities are externally imposed on you. You don't mean to belong to a particular group, but the society or other people put you in that group. So, what are some of the social identities? Popcorn, anybody can. Okay, let me get a marker here. Yep. Gender. Excellent. What else? Race. Uh-huh. Economic status. Religion. Education, meaning education attainment. Okay. Anything in the chat, Sierra? Religion, okay. Immigration status, excellent. Sexuality. Job titles. Disability, ability, yeah. Age. Age is an interesting one though, right? Because sometimes the older you are, the more authority you have, but then the older you are, the more marginalized you are at the same time. Like, you know, but it's definitely an identity. It's sort of a curve, yeah. Any others? Size, like the physical size, right? Yeah, physical appearance, definitely. Length of experience in the field. Excellent. Anything in the chat, Sierra? Okay. Yeah. Mental health. Neha. Primary way of knowing whether you have formal education or informal education, whether I like that. How you have gained your knowledge. Yeah. Language, yes. Yes. Parenthood. Yeah. Sierra. Education experiences. Yeah. Related to education attainment too. Sailor. Neurodiversity. Attractiveness, yeah, definitely. Right, it's an externally imposed standards of beauties. Yeah. Attractiveness, standards of beauty. Yeah, okay. Hold on just a sec. Do I have the right? Okay. Sorry, Zoom people, you weren't hearing what people were saying. Now we fixed it. Okay, go ahead.
Kind of similar to just this concept of way of knowing. I'm thinking about culture and how that's part of it.
Culture.
So ethnicity.
Let's do one more. Ethnicity, yes. I'm gonna go to Novum.
Oh, just national origin.
National origin. All right, excellent. Really robust list of social identities. So let's remember these social identity groups here. We're gonna switch gears a little bit and talk about power and privilege. So power is the ability to influence. Which one do I kill? Ceiling. Okay, here we go. Whew, tech, okay. Power is the ability to influence and make decisions that impact others. Privilege is advantages and benefits that individuals receive because of social groups they are perceived to be a part of. Privilege is often a result of systematic targeting and or marginalization of another social group. So you're all going to receive this PowerPoint after the workshop, so you don't have to necessarily take everything down. And I think I have links in the notes section of the PowerPoint for sources of some of these definitions. There's a lot of important notions in this privilege definition. Because of social groups they are perceived to be a part of, right? You don't have to actually recognize you belong to a particular group to receive privilege. If the society sees you belonging to that particular group, then you receive that privilege. That's just one example of the part of this definition that popped up to me. But not all social identities are created equal, right? Which is why I brought up that power and privilege, because we place judgment for against some groups of people. We consider some groups of people to be deficit, lacking, less than, inferior. We value certain identities and prioritize needs of some of those identity groups more than others. We also confer privilege to some groups. We treat them better than others. This is unfortunately how our country is set up. Our country is actually founded on these principles of treating some groups of people as non-human and certain other colonizers, to be honest, as humans. So it's deeply rooted in everything we do in this country, which is why you shouldn't take this personally, right? You didn't create the system. You were born into it. But we have the responsibility to recognize that this is the system that we live in, and we ought to be doing something about that, which is why you're here today. So on your table, you have this beautiful wheel, which actually shows you how complicated social identities are, because every one of us has multiple social identities. And pretty much every single one of those identities carry different value systems within the society. So let's take a minute to look at this wheel of power privilege to locate yourself based on the identities in this wheel, because you will more likely than not end up with a zigzag line like a star, because you're in the outer circle for one identity, inner circle for the other, somewhere in the middle. So I'm going to give you a minute to look at it just to reflect on your totality of your identities.
Okay, now that you just had a few minutes looking at the wheel and I see people annotating, drawing arrows, trying to find themselves and maybe people that they work with, why don't you take 5 minutes as a sort of group? And again, be mindful of like space and voice and make sure people have a chance to speak if they want to. And if they're actively listening, that's what they're doing. And think about the 2 following questions. What are some negative power dynamics you have experienced? Again, kind of like rooted in the wheel in front of you. And then how are they complicated by the social identities of the people involved? Okay, 5 minutes.
I'm happy to share first. I think one example of a negative power dynamic that I've experienced is where entities that are not representative or from the communities that I work in are able to impose their agendas. So whether that's certain types of infrastructure or allocation of resources that come down. And I think it shifts a lot from neutral to negative to positive, depending on what's happening. But I think ultimately the lack of the one-sidedness in terms of control and authority seems to be negative, even if the outcome might be positive. And I think that they are complicated by many different social identities, including education, class and access to resources, access to decision makers, being able to just be in the room, that all sort of, that being able to be in the room is sort of bundled up by all of those other identities.
Does anyone else want to go who didn't speak last time? I guess maybe us with the cameras on are the only ones ready to share. Okay, I guess I could do a quick one. Just popped into my head. I've had a number of experiences with like advisors in an educational setting or coaches, because I used to be an athlete and all of them were older than me and usually men. And I had multiple occasions of having to leave people, and that was really hard. And even though I was doing what was right for me, I felt like I was like failing in this relationship. It was like almost scary and hard to do face to face, to sort of recognize that kind of a one way, you know, they had a lot more power than me, that it wasn't working for me and that the right thing to do was leave. So yeah, I guess I knew enough to leave, but it wasn't easy.
Okay, one more minute.
I can go, I guess, if no one else wants to talk. Another thing that comes to mind for me is thinking about occupying space as like a non-binary person, and there's not really built-in infrastructure for.
Okay, as you're wrapping up. Okay, as you're wrapping up, looking for maybe 2 volunteers, somebody that's willing to maybe share out something they heard that they hadn't considered before they listen to before you engage in this conversation. Something.
One more minute.
I am not going to say no when somebody asks so nicely like that. Sure, 1 minute, and maybe people think about it. Was there something that came up for you that you heard at your table that you think would be useful to share with the larger group? 1 more minute.
Elliot, would you be willing to finish?
Yes. Okay. I was going to say, like, thinking about like bathrooms can be hard sometimes. I've experienced, you know, harassment and for choosing which bathroom I want to use if there's no easy option of having like a gender neutral bathroom. That's just not something that's like built in places. And despite there being like protections for people to use whatever bathroom best aligns with their identity, that's not always the case. But then also thinking about like, because I'm a transmasculine person and a white person, my experience, even if it's negative, is not going to be the same of someone else in the community who is navigating the same types of issues.
Okay, anybody willing to share something that they heard that would maybe further the learning for the larger group?
Nobody wants to share? What? Come on. Anybody in Zoom wants to share?
Yeah, you willing to share here?
Actually, I don't think she needs the mic.
Yeah, we turn on the ceiling.
Turn on the
mics.
ceiling mic, so we should be okay. Go ahead, Ellie.
Well, we were talking about situations where we are faced with a supervisor or boss who plays into white heteronormative misogyny, whether they're a man or a woman at the top. And so actually like getting he actually said tall, specifically white man, to go ask for things at the top often leads to more success than if one of us would do it. And that has been a very, two different people had that same experience actually at our table. So.
Thank you. One more? Lots of heads were nodding, so I'm sure.
So, being in a space where, let's say, I don't have certain types of power because I'm female presenting, not cis white male, but being in a professional space and feeling like I'm being seen, I'm being heard, and I'm being recognized on the same level of others, like in a higher power, equal power structure, but maybe like different privileges.
Thank you for sharing.
Awesome. Okay, now I have to do some things here. Okay. I'm getting there. By the time we end the workshop, I'll be an expert. Okay. So here are some tools that I can share with you on what to do when you encounter a really complicated, difficult power dynamic. In the moment, so this could be something that your boss says about somebody else or you directly, and it's racially offensive or offensive in terms of your gender identity or whatever identity that you have. Somebody that has power over you said something that is offensive to you. Okay, so that's sort of the landscape here. In the moment, you should always just pause, take a moment to collect your thoughts, right? You don't have to react to what somebody says to you right away. Pause, collect your thoughts, and then assess what happened. And this all happens really quickly, right? You're not like sitting there in front of your supervisor and taking 5 minutes to do this. So it's something that happens quickly, but do pause and do assess what just happened. Those are things you can definitely do. And it's okay to just take a pause, even in the middle of a conversation with your supervisor. That alone should signal to the supervisor or the person that you're interacting with that that person said something that was off, if that person is perceptive. And then you get to decide, again, in the moment, do you want to confront what was said to you? Or do you want to deflect? And it's okay to deflect. You don't have to confront everything. It's okay to just change the subject or otherwise deflect, take the conversation to a different direction, right? So those are choices that you have. And I've had people tell me in this type of workshop that deflecting didn't seem empowering enough, that if somebody said something that was offensive to me, I should just stand up and say something, right? Sure, but there's no shame in deciding, you know what, I'm going to protect myself right now in this moment, and I'm not going to engage. That's taking control of yourself. And that to me is power. I'm giving myself the power to deflect and just not engage in this conversation. So the choice is yours. You don't have to confront. You have the choice to just deflect or leave. It's up to you. Now, this is if something is happening to you, though. I'm going to talk about allyship a little bit later, or upstander a little bit later. That's a slightly different thing. So that's great, right? Pause, assess, decide, confront, or deflect. That's easy enough, except what you think you will do is not always what you actually do. There are so many moments I say, you know what, if somebody said something like that, I'm just going to say this back to them. But if something happens, like I'm silent. So just be mindful of your limitations and what you know you are capable of. Just be honest about yourself. There is no shame in not doing anything. So it's important to have multiple tools in your toolbox. It might be good to have a tool that's a confrontation. If somebody says something like this, here's my comeback. You have that in your toolbox. But I'm also going to have a deflection tactic. So you can have that in your toolbox. And depending on where you are, what you are, who you're interacting with, you just draw from that toolbox. By the way, the pause and assess, this is something that Laura McComb from the Osborne Group talks to me about all the time. If you're in a meeting, have a glass of water or some beverage, right? When somebody said something that's like, oh my God, I can't believe that person said that, just reach for that drink, take a sip. That gives you a moment. I thought it was a great tool. So I'm keeping that in my toolbox. You should definitely do that as well. Watch out for gaslighting yourself, and I'll explain what gaslighting is. Some of you already know. A lot of times we just think to ourselves, wait, I'm just overreacting. Oh, no, that person didn't mean to say that. Don't do that. Trust your instinct. If something feels yicky, it probably is. And you should definitely trust it. A different type of tools here. There are organizational infrastructures that you can set in place within your organization, especially if you're in a position to implement some of these things. What these will do is make navigating power dynamics slightly easier. Okay. So at the organization level, you can have organizational policies on gift acceptance policy. This is very specific to donor staff interaction. If you fundraise for your organization, if you're in the position to solicit donations, this would be a good policy for your organization to have. It essentially says, if a donor is a hardcore right-wing Tea Partier who wants to donate $20,000 for your environmental education program, if you don't have a gift acceptance policy, you're going to be in the conundrum. It's like, do we take the 20,000 or do we let go? Or it might be $1 million donation from an associate of Donald Trump. What do you do? If you don't have a gift acceptance policy, that could put you in a real pickle. So if you have fundraising in your organization, think about a gift acceptance policy that spells out clearly who you will accept gifts from, where you draw the line. Fundraising event partnership agreement. If you have fundraising events with external partners, you might want to consider having a really clear agreement with your partner organizations. That includes board members too. If you're in a position to organize fundraising events or any kind of events with your board members or funders or other external partners, you might want to think about, okay, we're going to do this as a host organization, and you will do XYZ, and you clearly spell out what your staff roles are. This came about because there are times when a staff person works with a board member to host a fundraising event. Sometimes the board member will use that staff person inappropriately, like go fetch me a drink at the event, right? That's not your role as a staff person unless it's in the agreement that your staff will fetch drinks for the board members. But those are power dynamics that you can avoid if you clearly spell out from the beginning what your roles are, what your funders' roles are, what your partner organizations' roles are, just to start to avoid some of these power conflict. Sexual harassment policy is something every single organization should have. And if you are not in a position to develop these policies, you should ask your supervisor for a copy of it to make sure that your organization has one. These are the policy issues, some of the examples, right? There are other things that are softer that your organization can be doing, and that's building organizational culture that is equitable, inclusive, and, well, not diverse. Well, the organization should be diverse, but the culture should be inclusive, right? And that isn't just a policy issue. A lot of it is staff training. People need training to be able to develop the language to talk to people who are from a very different background. We get used to talking white English, but that's not the appropriate language in every space you want to navigate in. Team building. You should really be doing team building as an organization because it's really about relationships between people. Leadership development, that's important too. You may not be in a position to mandate some of these things or even demand these things, but if you are in a position to host some of these leadership development, and that could be a lot of different things, but it should be rooted in recognizing systemic oppression within your institution and working to dismantle it through developing organizational policies and building culture of inclusivity within your organization. And that really needs to be done at the leadership level because there's only so much you can do as a low-level staff person or even mid-level staff person. So leadership development is super important. Team building, if your leadership doesn't support team building, you can start your own, right? There are organizations that have employee resource groups. Those are sort of like affinity groups, just employees get together, share resources, start doing the work on their own, which isn't ideal, but if your leadership isn't willing, you can still get together with your fellow people. Okay, practice makes perfect. So we're gonna go into a hypothetical scenario activity now. We're gonna define some terms for roles we may play in real life power dynamics because we all have very different identities. You may not always be the victim. You might be better as an upstander, particularly considering the scenario we're gonna look at. Yes, everybody has a definition in the packet. So we're gonna review a hypothetical scenario of a negative power dynamic in small groups at your tables. First definition is an upstander, a person who speaks or acts in support of an individual or cause, particularly someone who intervenes on behalf of a person being attacked or bullied. White savior complex, an ideology that is acted upon when a white person from a position of superiority attempts to help or rescue a BIPOC person or community. This is something that y'all should be very careful of. You're not going in there to save the person who's being harmed. You're going to go in there to support the person and be an ally. You're not saving them. Whether this is done consciously or unconsciously, people with this complex have the underlying belief that they know best or that they have skills that BIPOC people do not have. I didn't spell out BIPOC, but it's Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And you can replace that BIPOC with many other identities, right? This is white savior complex, but you can think about hetero savior complex, ability-bodied, able-bodied savior complex as well. Gaslighting. a form of psychological manipulation that makes people of color and people of marginalized identities question their own experiences, racism or ableism or whatever other systems of oppression, or makes any marginalized group question their experiences of marginalization. We do this a lot, especially as a cis female. I do this all the time and I have to stop. It's a long process. Okay, so scenario for discussion. Again, if this gets to be too much because it's too painful, too traumatic, too triggering, please just do what you need to do to feel safe and be kind to yourself. I don't want you to leave this room completely traumatized. Scenario we're going to be discussing as a group. Lupita is Afro-Latina. She takes a taxi with her white male boss to a meeting. As they ride through a disinvested neighborhood where Lupita lives, the boss jokingly says to Lupita, "People shoot each other in this neighborhood. You must have a gun at home to protect yourself, right?" This is actually a real scenario I heard from a colleague of mine. So here are the discussion questions. What happened in the scenario? What are some ways Lupita can navigate the situation in the moment? And if you want to be the upstander, you can put yourself in a taxi with Lupita, riding the taxi together, right? What would you do if, as an upstander in the moment? So for many of you, that might be the case. If you're in the taxi with Lupita and the boss said that to Lupita. What are some follow-up actions Lupita can take afterward? What are some follow-up actions an upstander can take afterward? So those are the questions you will be discussing as a group. And
So it's 12:04 and we were going to give you till 12:20 to talk. I would definitely try to make sure that you spend a few minutes just trying to answer the first question, focused on Lupita. And then I think as Shino said, like put yourself in that car with her and really try to be the upstander and really spend a little bit more time maybe thinking about that because it's you yourself. Okay? Yeah, so go back to the question. Oh, sorry. Okay, so just making sure you have a common understanding about what happened in the scenario. And then what are some ways Lupita can navigate, and then kind of quickly go to question, I think 3, and then the last question, follow-up actions, right? You as the upstander. 15 minutes.
So I think we have the first question is what happened in this scenario? Is that right? I think in my view, initially, something that happened is that this person who has authority and or privilege or power over Lupita has made an assumption about a community that they have nothing evidently to do with, and about how Lupita experiences and responds to that assumption.
I'd also say that, the assumption, just to be specific, that the supervisor or somebody more senior specifically connected Lupita and her neighborhood to violence, which is something that is like pretty extreme, not really appropriate in the workplace. And is also, in my opinion, something that is kind of tragic and should be treated with respect and not joked about in the workplace. So he had this mental association with her and her neighborhood to this thing and spoke about it in an inappropriate way.
Anybody else have anything to add?
I
Not
guess
maybe we
thinking about the gender dynamic too is like, would he speak to a man the same way? Probably not. Maybe similar comments would be made. But yeah.
I was thinking about the physical proximity, like you shouldn't say this anywhere, but I was trying to picture it physically, that there's like literally nowhere to go. You're in this really confined space of a car. That feels really kind of threatening, I guess. You can't walk away, even if you wanted to.
I agree. I think it also feels really targeted and focused as well, because not only was he talking about the neighborhood, he also addressed a sensitive question to her specifically. So it's very honed in on her and her relationship to violence.
Should we go to the next question, or does anyone want to say anything else? What are some ways Lupita can navigate the situation at the moment?
I mean, thinking about strategies we just discussed, I think deflection is a very valid route to go in this moment, especially if you're trapped in a car with someone you might not feel safe, you can't escape. And then oftentimes if people call people in and, you know, say how something is harmful, that can just lead to more backlash. So if that was something that she felt like she wasn't safe to do or not comfortable doing, that's definitely one situation to navigate in that exact moment.
I appreciate that, Elliot. I'm trying to think myself in that situation, and I feel like I would probably try and like laugh uncomfortably or deflect or change the conversation rather than confronting it directly, especially knowing that I'm trapped in the car.
I tend to have like a freeze response, and I don't know that that is like a tool, but I guess it forces a pause. But I don't know. Honestly, it's hard to put myself in those shoes of how I would successfully navigate that. I tend to, like, my emotions come in pretty easily for me. So I think I would be focusing on like managing my emotions, and maybe I would get quiet. And then maybe they would see, just playing that out a little more, maybe they would see that they had impacted me and that they might realize on their own without you even saying anything that they had said something harmful. That would be I'm optimistic, but it's possible. But I don't know that that's a good answer, really. Can anyone think of a way that like they would try and do the more confrontational route? I don't know. Or does everyone feel like deflection is sort of what feels intuitive?
I've personally seen how a pause can help redirect the conversation or highlight that there was a problem in the last comment. I think depending on the comfort level of either Lupita or the other person who might be in this car, to call it out directly. I think there's like a spectrum to how that can be called out. But I think that there might be opportunities there to do something like that.
If I may, going off of what Emily put in the chat, in an upstander position, not in the car, but maybe thinking about afterwards, right? Me, I'm just jumping to the last question of asking that person, sometimes just asking them for more information, they get caught up in their own thoughts and realize how offensive they were. And so asking them, following up, that was a really interesting comment. Do you, what evidence do you have about shootings in that area? What did you mean by that? And just kind of asking for more of what they were thinking. One, to actually genuinely learn about more about what they were thinking, but then it might also challenge that person to realize that what they said was inappropriate.
I think that though that approach could also kind of backfire and take a different turn if this individual kind of just doubled down and got really just kind of escalated and felt they needed to kind of defend their comment, which then again in a vehicle could become really uncomfortable and possibly even unsafe. But I think regardless, it's a tricky situation.
Appreciate that, Jennifer. I think as someone speaking for myself, as somebody who carries a lot of privilege in this world, that's an opportunity for someone like me as an upstander to make that, knowing that there might be less risk having it come from me than say other individuals in the car.
I appreciate that acknowledgement, Chris.
I think I agree with what Christina was saying, that even as an upstander, I might wait until I was out of the car. I might try and help in the moment with neutralizing or deflection, try to protect a little bit, move on, move away from that topic. But any kind of more confrontational, I do think it depends also on the power dynamics of the upstander and the supervisor. We don't know that from the scenario. Are they also me, the upstander's supervisor? I might feel more limited in my range of approaches if I'm afraid of, any sort of reprisal on me. And if that was the case, you could go a more formal route. You could actually issue a complaint, so it does a little bit depend on the details.
I think too, making sure that Lupita is centered in all of this, and sometimes people might not want a complaint to be made because that just means more work for them. If they just want to be that was horrible and racist and I don't want to have to think about it. I just want to move on and get through the day.
Good
But
point.
centering Lupita and what she would want to happen and being I'm here to support you as much as you want. But I totally understand if you don't want to talk about it or you just want to do your thing, but offering support, but just making sure that her feelings and her safety is what the goal of any intervention would be, if she consents to that.
100%, starting first and foremost with checking in with her.
Especially if there's risk of becoming a target for repercussions as well. Lupita should 100% be centered and really be the decision maker.
I'm kind of curious about like starting points. Like say you have decided to talk to this person afterwards, like Christina mentioned, like open-ended questions. Why did you say that? What were you thinking? Do folks have other ways of thinking about like how to even start a conversation?
Okay, 2-minute warning, 2 minutes, and then we're gonna have maybe each table kind of maybe quickly share out. I think we should have enough time. 1 minute share out each.
I think that's a good question, Lindsay. I don't know how I would start that conversation. I think it would, I'd have to, I could only imagine if I was like directly in that situation and I knew more context to it, but as a hypothetical, it's hard to say that there would be like a direct decision tree I would immediately go to.
I was just like trying to think about something that might get the person, the supervisor, into like a more empathetic stance, but it's hard to see getting them past defensiveness, you know, but some kind of question to like get them to reflect on what they think the impact of their words were, but maybe that's not effective. I'm genuinely asking because other than the open-ended, which I've, you know, kind of learned in some calling in trainings, I'm like thinking about where else to start, but I don't know.
I think maybe an easier place to start is just like setting the boundary of don't talk to people that way at work versus, you know, like getting into this thing where you're trying to change who they are and what their beliefs are. You know, like it's not a conversation that you're having with a friend and you don't have to, you know, really know all that about somebody else that you work with. It can, I don't know how I would start that conversation is what we've been talking about, but I think the problem of like changing what they think and who they are can be maybe something more like long-term and is a little bit bigger picture than what actually can be done to help protect your colleagues in this scenario.
Thanks, Emily. I think I would feel more comfortable in the long run making a point of sort of coming back to that incident, even indirectly.
Wait, hold on, Vivian. All right, Zoom folks, we're gonna switch to sharing out. Okay. And ceiling mic. Okay. Okay, Vivian.
I'll start and then they can add in.
Okay, sure.
Okay, so one of the big things we talked for a while about is, you know, what does an upstander do in the moment while you're in the car? The fact that it was in a car is a big deal because you cannot escape that situation. So you want to be thoughtful about what you say in that moment versus what you do afterwards and follow up with. And one thing that we found as some experiences being an upstander, that's important to show support for the person that is experiencing this is just making an immediate eye contact with them, somehow acknowledging, even if it's just silently, like, I heard that too. I understand that this is problematic, just to show that kind of support there. But we also, and I don't want to talk too much, but we did talk about how The way an upstander who is white versus black might be different. Because of just different comfort levels with the fact that it is a white boss.
Thank you for all of us.
Yes.
How about this table here? The table in the back, so to speak.
Oh, is this
Just your takeaway from your conversation.
oh, I actually like, I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name, but I like your suggestion.
Oh, Natalia.
Natalia, yeah.
I said that, like, if I were Lupita, I'd be like, why would you say something like that?
So you identified with Lupita.
Yeah, because it was just kind of something ridiculous to say, so I immediately thought, like, why would you say that?
Natalia, can I ask you
Straight up.
a question? Yeah, so Pete, who is sitting here, is your boss, who's a white man. Like, would you feel comfortable saying that to Pete?
Yeah.
I think, see, I would too, but I think that's specific to Pete, right? Like, I think it kind of depends on the white male boss potentially, but I'm glad you brought that up because.
But I also, I don't know, I just believe in honesty, so I present who I am at all times, and that's it, so. Say, why would you say that? That's it.
But I remember you also said there was something in your head before the question.
That was stupid.
And then you paused.
It's just a matter of professionalism.
This group want to go?
Sure. We had some similar discussion around like how do you ask a question so that the person perhaps has to explain themselves or has that moment of reflection. We also were curious, like, could you connect back to like a norm that is shared at the organization? Like let's be at like whatever that norm is in your organization. Like, let's be thoughtful of like, you know, whatever that tenant is. But something where perhaps, yeah, it's either broadening it to a we, it's helping that person reflect, or you be the bystander mode and you just are really focusing as an upstander on like Lupita and making sure that they feel whatever supported and that you acknowledge that this happened, as Christina was saying.
Yeah. Sierra was saying that they're pretty non-confrontational, but they've developed the art of just like being like, like just giving a look.
Sierra, you want to say that? In your
I
own
mean,
words?
I guess just like as someone born and raised in New York City, I feel like saying something is sometimes like the wrong thing because you don't know like how people grew up, like how they'll react, anything like that. So I feel like just starting off with a look, and then sometimes they like understand, they're like, oh, maybe that wasn't the right thing to say, and then like go from there.
So we have looks, we have body language, we have.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, hopefully jump in as well. I think like in terms of like navigating the situation, I think we arrived that Lupita could probably like slightly deflect, but slightly also address the comment. So by focusing on the positive things about the neighborhood, for example, right? You know, his comment pretty much wrote everything else off about the neighborhood in a really dismissive, patronizing tone. So maybe what Lupita can say is maybe like address this comment if she really does feel like she lives in a dangerous neighborhood, right? So say like, yeah, you know, like the violence is an unfortunate thing, but there are so many great restaurants in the area, and the ability that I have to be able to just have access to that, you know, makes up for it. Or I really love my neighbors and we take care of one another. So that was kind of like a way where we feel like, again, we can sort of like deflect by not engaging too much, but at the same time, letting him know that we still heard that comment and here's our way of like addressing it. And then in terms of just like being an upstander, I think, you know, we talked about like body language and just being able to like read that person, being able to like determine like how that Lupita wants to deal with it essentially, right? So like after she's had a moment to assess the situation, how is she, you know, is she giving us a look? Is she like standing up for herself? Is she choosing to act in that situation? So I think we kind of wanted to just like weigh it out as well and see how she's reacting before like we make a move, essentially. And I guess just like the last thing, we also talked about patterns too. So like, is it something that's happening for the first time? Has this boss made like similar comments in the past? Or is it something that maybe it is like a one-time thing? And so maybe like deflection really is the best way to go. Or is it something that we feel like has happened so many times? And then, you know, so that maybe does deserve like more of an escalation where we need to like take more serious action.
Wow, that's a lot. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, last table.
Right. Well, it was kind of interesting too, because although I don't think any of us identify as an Afro-Latino woman, we all had like personal similar moments. So that was kind of interesting. I think the ideas of deflecting from the boss's comment or redirecting where the attention is focused. So yeah, maybe like it's a great restaurant in the neighborhood or something else like that. And definitely maintaining that contact with Lupita, whether it's eye contact or body language. And then following up afterwards with her first, not the boss, to see maybe she doesn't want her boss involved. Maybe she was fine with it. Maybe it didn't impact her and maybe it did, but to find out from her what her experience was. And yeah, and the difference between like calling the boss out on his wildly inappropriate comment. And Isabel said making a joke could be something that could be done to deflect it.
Yeah, we considered what was the upstanders' power dynamics relationship with the boss.
Sure.
So like, let's say they had a rapport together, then yeah, like as the upstander, I'm gonna call the damn boss out, be like, bro, you know, I eat right there, coming with me sometime, bring your gun with that. But like, if you're the upstander that is maybe like, this is your first time in the car with the boss, like maybe your reaction is gonna be a little bit different, but in either scenario, still check in with Lupita first. And then go from there.
Thank you so much. Before we go to the remote folks, thank you for bringing up the need to center Lupita as a upstander, because that's super important, right? Sometimes the instinct is to jump in and say something to the boss, but it is important to actually make sure if you're going to intervene, Lupita wants you to intervene. So I'm really happy to hear that you all came up with that. And just the diversity of tools that we have came up with, it's really awesome. I hope you're all taking notes because I'm putting all of those in my toolbox. Remote folks. Oh, I'm sorry.
We're just a small group. We're just tiny.
Yes, tiny and mighty. So sorry.
No, you're fine. I think we like talked a lot about like humor deflecting. Though I do want to add like something else for other folks to think about. Is how instead of calling out, how do you call in, right? So in this scenario, right, like even whether it's Lupita or you in the car with Lupita and her supervisor, asking the question of like, well, why do you think that, right? Like trying to understand that person's perspective of why they come up with this idea of this neighborhood being really violent, to be able to break that down and then go into that conversation of like, oh, well, there's a lot of really great restaurants, or recognize that, yeah, if there is violence and known violence in the community, how do you address that and work through that so that the immediate response isn't like, oh, you need to have a gun here because this is how dangerous this neighborhood is. So, in addition to calling out, don't forget that you can also call in.
Thank you, Rosanna. Excellent. Remote folks, anybody wants to unmute and share what your discussions were like?
I took some notes from our group, but in terms of talking about what happened, echoing a lot of things, also highlighted the gender dynamics, the physical proximity and lack of ability to leave, being confined in the car and feeling targeted, not only about the neighborhood, but also Lupita's relationship with the neighborhood. Some ways that to navigate this situation, including deflection, but we also acknowledge that it could lead to more backlash at confrontation, and sort of our tendency sometimes to have the freeze response, which may allow for the pause, but may also have other implications. What can an upstander do? Mentioning centering on Lupita, offering support for her as much as she wants, especially if there's repercussions for speaking out, but that Lupita should be 100% centered in the decision making. Also speaking up, being able to say, setting the boundary, don't talk to people at work like that, or possibly more medium and short, medium, and long term, getting people to begin to think and change the way that they're talking about it by injecting other considerations or highlighting the faults in which that comment came up in, but I would also open up to everyone else in the group if I missed anything or misarticulated it.
Great, thank you, Chris. So we're gonna have to wrap up because we're coming to the end of the session. Couple takeaways. So learn to recognize power dynamics at play, especially those complicated by social identities, which you all just demonstrated you're super good at already. Use tools and best practices to navigate difficult power dynamics, which you already have all the tools.
We can't hear you on Zoom.
Sorry, is this better?
Yeah.
Okay. Develop organizational infrastructure for managing power dynamics. Even if you're not in that position of decision-making place in your organization, you can advocate for some of these policies to be in place, or you can inquire whether the organization has these policies. So you can be an advocate within your organization. But if you're in a position to develop some of these policies, definitely think about that. Continue learning and deepening your understanding of social identities and how they impact power dynamics. This is a journey. So we are actually all on the journey, right? Sailor, you're not alone. We're all on a journey together. Whether you're safe committed or not, a safe space commitment or not, we are on the journey. There is no end. There is no checklist. This is something we just do day in and day out for the rest of our lives, because that's how this work is all about, right? So yes, you should take a break sometimes. Self-care is important, but this is work that we need to do every day for the rest of our lives. So there are a couple of resources. These are links that you will get in your copy. And finally, please, if you have a smartphone, go to that QR code and it's the session survey. I would really like every single one of you to fill it out. If you don't have a smartphone with a camera QR code reader, you can go to the tinyurl.com/HEP Power Dynamics Survey 2023 with the capital letters. So if you can just take a few minutes during lunch to fill out the survey, I would really appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Shino and Vivian. And just want to also give a big hand and thank all of our speakers from today, Sailor, Ellie, Liz, Neha, Lindsay, Rosanna. Thank you so much for all your work. And of course, Shino and Vivian as well. So this is bringing us to the close of the DEIJ Summit this morning. Just quick show of hands. I'm curious, how many of you are planning on staying for the Harbor Educator meeting as well? Okay, helpful. Great, great, great. And then online folks, if you're planning on joining, there is a separate Zoom link for the afternoon. Again, that would be found in the email sent out yesterday. Of course, please be in touch if you have any questions. We're going to be resuming at 1:30 for the Harbor Educators. So folks that are here in person, you have two options. One is that we're here at Pier 57, as I mentioned at the start. So this is Hudson River Park's new public open space on the ground floor. We're excited to take folks to our Discovery Tank, which is an interactive exhibit focused on Hudson River wildlife with some games where you can learn a bit more about the river. You get to be an oyster toadfish in one of them, for those of you that That's maybe a draw. You can also build your own plankton. So if you want to check that space out, it's just down the hallway. Our education manager, Rachel, who's waving her arm over here, is happy to walk folks down and give you a quick tour of that space. Otherwise, nearby food options, just to let folks know, there is a food market on this pier. You probably walk through it to get here. Market 57 has about 15 different food vendors. There's also Chelsea Market that's less than a 5-minute walk from here, just on the other side of the highway on 15th Street and 10th Avenue. And then of course, we still have a good amount of food from this morning. So if you're also on a budget, there's food here. Please eat it. Let's not have it go to waste. And there's soda and soft drinks and more coffee and fruit on the way. So that's where we're at right now. You'll have about an hour. Keep the conversations